If you're here, you already sense there's something out there, something magical and mysterious, just waiting for you to find. And you've probably already discovered it isn't as easy as just thinking happy thoughts. You're not alone. Generations of shamans, philosophers, seers, and scientists have pursued this eternal quest. Where their ideas come together, you'll find powerful tools to cultivate magic and self-mastery in your own life. Welcome to the Magic and Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Donna Woodwell. I'm a former journalist and author, a master astrologer, and a hermetic initiate, and it's my honor to be your guide. In each episode, I'll meet you at the crossroads of science and spirit, reason and intuition, to help you discover the wisdom that works for you. Are you ready? The adventure awaits. I am here with the most amazing, my favoritist, is that a word? Astrologer, Kathy Biehl. Now, hello. I'm so glad we're diving into this subject with Kathy because I trust no one more than her to suss out the deeper meaning of all of the crazy that is going on in the world right now. And it's not just because she has the astrological chops to be able to do this. It's also because she has, beyond astrology, the wisdom and life experience to understand what she's looking at. So, Kathy, welcome back to my podcast. Again, I'm so glad you're here, and I'm glad we have a chance to talk about election season, politics, and how we are all going to get through these moments in time. So welcome back.
Thank you. I love talking with you.
Woo! Can we start with talking about what gravitates you to this topic every year?
Well, I look at things in terms of a continuum. I'm someone who's always playing connect the dots. Repo Man is one of my 5 top films, and there's the concept of the weird lattice of coincidence that overlays all existence. The difference is, in my view, and Repo Man's view is, it doesn't mean anything, it just is. I have found, no, it means something. And I love to track the dots and look at the picture and get an idea of where we're going. And you can call it celestial clockwork. I mean, that's one thing I call it. And stuff that's happening in the public eye seems to be extremely instructive. Like to show people, here, astrology is at work. It's at work on the ground. This is why things are so crazy. And there are certain people, certain events that are almost archetypal. They're like the mythology of our times. The problem is that we're living in the middle of the mythos getting into our heads and making us nuts. And we've been living with certain sagas for a number of years. And with what the outer planets are doing as we're recording this, between the beginning of September and November 19th, we are wrapping up huge cycles and processes. So that's kind of the framework for it all, and understanding that this is going on and a lot of different things are hitting maximum expression will help. I mean, I think it helps. And I do have people who don't, so this is a very long-winded, indirect answer to your question, but I find a lot of fodder that explains a lot of what's going on, and the world and the news throws a lot at me that makes me go, oh yeah, I see the connections. And I have a lot of people who ask me to explain, why is this happening? So I just do this all the time. There's your answer.
I think it's a great answer. I think that meaning underlies so much of what we need to feel like it's going to be okay. And that we're going to be safe, that at least we're going to be able to navigate whatever the cosmos throws at us. And so I bet you're getting a lot of people, basically tiptoeing around is it all going to be okay? Are we going to be fine? So when you sit down Kathy, to figure out how invisible energies affect our everyday lives. What are you looking at? Are you looking at how this relates to people, how it relates to cycles? Is there something, some magic secret sauce you have in there that everyone else wishes they could have?
There are a couple of things I do. I look at a number of different ways to forecast what's happening. I pick certain people that are major players, and I look at a number of different ways to forecast what's coming up for them, what they're going through, where they're likely to be headed. And then I also pay attention to really big events that occur and look at what's going on astrologically at the moment of those events. And pretty much always there's something that ties absolutely into it. And then I just look for cycles. I look for when something is activating what was going on during that big event, and you can make a path of dots and turn them into an arrow, which is what I do. I turn them into an arrow.
Connect the dots. All right,
Connect the dots. Yes, I sing Pee Wee Herman a lot.
You mentioned players and you mentioned cycles. So let's first talk about players. Who would you identify in this mixture as key players? I mean, I'm assuming, we have Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, but who else would you look at as a key player in this process?
Well, I've looked at their running mates. And initially I looked at Biden as well before he decided to pull out. And I'll just throw in, he's got a lot of activity. He is not going into the background. He is not disappearing. So he's still a player in all of this. And then if people ask me about certain other people, like there are certain Supreme Court justices I've been keeping a watchful eye on, and they're a little more down the line. But interestingly, when really big astrological processes are going on, they tend to hit everybody. If someone is a defining figure in our culture, it's really kind of eerie how the same things are either activating and empowering people or putting the squeeze on them.
Okay. So, we have an election coming up very soon. Who do you want to start with? Shall we start on the Trumpian side? Should we start on the Kamala side? How do you want to dive into this storytelling, since I know you are a master storyteller? Where shall we go first?
Let's start with the positive that will calm people down. So what I'd like to do, there are two storylines that are running parallel that launched at the same time with different impacts on the two tickets. And I'd like to talk about the storylines and then talk a little bit more about the environment that we're in right now that's putting everybody on edge. Okay, so both of these storylines start, at least for purposes of discussion, on August 19th of this year, which is when the Democratic National Convention started. There was a full moon in the sign of Aquarius that involved a change agent, Uranus, agent of change, and this hit the United States moon, which represents the people. So that day and things happening then were very important to bring a different way of being to expression of who we are as a community, and a sign ruled by Venus, women, was part of it. Okay, so Venus is a through line in all of this. Venus is a starring player that is, all right, so on the day of the convention, there was a powerful lineup that brought containment to a lot of possibilities, to a lot of talk, and it pulled in women. It pulled in women trying to heal or clean things up. That was Venus. And Kamala was having her Venus return on that day. So that's a technical thing, meaning that Venus, when she was being formally nominated for the presidency, Venus was coming back to where it was in her chart when she was born. But it's more complicated than that. Venus is part of a configuration in her chart that is a change agent mandate. People born in the mid-60s have the two agents of cosmic change: radical, sudden, shocking change, and evolutionary level change. They have them fused in their personalities. And she's
Kind of
got
like the
that.
60s.
Yeah, like the mid-60s, but they're like the walking embodiment of, I know a better way to do things. Let's clean it up. And her Venus is right there, which fits with her being an advocate for women's rights, doing all of the inviting somebody into her home who'd been sexually abused before she even went to law school. She has a long, long history of and looking at things in a very, very practical way. So on that day, there was, you can look at a giant triangle going on where the thing representing her and the thing representing the old way of doing things, or father time, or accountability, or dad, big dad energy. Okay, so I see Tim Walz as part of this, Saturn. They were opposite each other, and when we get to January 20th, Inauguration Day, Venus will have traveled and will be meeting with Saturn. So we will have woman authority in the inauguration chart in the house of dreams and wishes, with the sun, with the part of the chart that represents the leader showing evolutionary change and a new way of doing things. And where that part will be on January 20th relates back to what was going on in the sky the very day that Joe Biden decided not to run and handed the reins over to her. So it's all linked together. So I see this as a trajectory of female president. There it goes. Now, so on the same day, so any questions about this? I know I used more technical language than a lot of the viewers will like, but I tried to turn it into something easier to get. You have questions about any of this? Does it make sense?
I think it is something easier to get. Basically, Kamala's campaign moment kicked off at a time when she was tapping into the zeitgeist. There was something bigger than herself going on, and she was embodying. The thing I love about astrology is that moments in time seem to give birth to who we need at some future moment in time.
Right.
And it happens where, the right character is in the right place at the right time to continue that story. And I think that's one of the most amazing undercurrents of the through line. It's almost like, okay, this moment in time knows I need something, but we've already created it back here. And there's always that synchronicity as the cycles intertwine over generations sometimes. So your forecast is that Inauguration Day suggests female power and ascendancy.
Yes.
And we have a female positioned at this moment in time to become and step into that story.
And it was
So
birthed.
you're going on the record saying,
Yes.
we're going to have a woman president in a few months.
She'll be sworn in. Now, who knows what happens between now and then, but she will be sworn in. And this also fits Tim Walz's chart, and it fits Trump and J.D. Vance, because this fusion of authority, the government, and females happens in their house of open enemies. So there. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one thing. There was a parallel storyline that started on that day, or maybe it didn't start on that day, but there was a launching point. So August 19th, I mentioned that there was a triangle-like aspect that brought containment and possibly consequences, and it locked into Trump's chart. It pulled in his planet that represents his being a catalyst, a change agent, a chaos agent, a disruptor, and the influence that expands everything it touches. Jupiter was sitting right on top of it on that day. And so Saturn, representing the government, authority, was exactly slamming it from the house of open enemies, and Venus was opposite it. So I thought at that time something's going to happen with a female judge. What did happen was this woman, who actually is the physical embodiment of what's going to get down on him, shows up and gets the nomination. But here's how that plays out for him. Now, I saw that as an inevitability. I've been saying it's like the Iron Maiden closed its doors on him at that time, which is vicious, but it gets the point across to people. Because there are other things going on, a wrecking ball influence has been moving back and forth over the center line of his chart, which represents where you're at home. Like, what the bottom part is your home, family, security, where you physically live. The top part is what your role is out in the world. So there's been this wrecking ball going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over it. And the full moon on that day emphasized that with the wrecking ball right there. So something locked into place that has long-term destabilizing ramifications, and with authority or accountability coming for him. And again, at the time or in advance, I looked at it and I thought, oh, a female judge is going to do something. Well, it is possible that there was yet a third thing going on besides the possibility of a female judge, besides this political candidate who is a woman who absolutely embodies and was like right there where Venus was. So we have the physical, the lotus for POTUS showing up right there. There's another thing that this could be part of. But let me take it to the end, all right? So going to the end of this part of the story, by Inauguration Day, Saturn and Venus together are going to slam into his little disruptor thing, his Uranus, and there is something that's going to become even more inevitable by that point, and it is not his going back into the White House. It is not his going back into the White House, given what other things that have happened. So,
Well, what is it then?
pause button.
I'm the one who gets to the end of the book before, the book is
Right.
over, just
Well,
to find out where
actually,
we're going.
there's an epilogue for him that goes into March. So
Okay.
let's scooch forward just a tiny bit. The middle of October.
Okay, so
Yeah, there's something else going on that is hinting at another thing that happened in August or near August, and it has ramifications into March. Legal ramifications.
well, spill the beans.
Okay, spill the beans. The thing is this. Full moons are very important times for this man. He was born on a full moon. If you ever see his chart, he has the sun in Gemini within a degree. It's close. It's very, very close to the moon in Sagittarius. And his nodal axis is there too. So his natural, just know that that's important stuff. Okay.
He has cycles.
Yeah, and so and so the extremity, he's prone to extreme behavior. Full moon people can be that way. Raise his hand. And the full moon in the middle of October in the sign of Aries was in a really demanding relationship with a pair in his chart. Interestingly, Venus and Saturn, I've already mentioned them. In his chart, they're in the sign of Cancer, and they're in the house that deals with organizations. So this, I've seen this as the Trump org money. It also, Venus could be money, Venus could be women. Saturn being there could be the organization, it could be government, something coming through. Mars, which is a trigger, when Mars goes over things, things happen. Mars is an influence of attack, of motivation, of fieriness, of action. Mars is heading for that pair. At the full moon, it's getting slammed, it's moving over them. And often, it's not exactly moving across them yet, but often when an aspect is building, it is more noticeable. So on the eve of the full moon, word gets out that he attempted another hush money scheme with Stormy Daniels this summer and was going to cloak it during this election season by just reducing making a settlement of a judgment she owes him. He does this while there's still sentencing pending for having violated federal election laws for hiding a hush money payment. But I looked at this and went, this also fits it, because the woman, Stormy, Venus, and Saturn, and the legal system, and these lawyers leaking all this stuff. Well, Mars is going to go retrograde. You may have heard of Mercury retrograde. It's just when there's an optical illusion that makes it look like a planet is going backwards, and any planet can do it, and Mars will be going retrograde, and it's going to be back where it is currently, as we're recording this, back where it was when this disclosure came at the end of January, within a couple of days after the inauguration, and then again at the end of March. So we have at the end of January, we already know that Saturn and Venus, some kind of female authority, are going to be in a really uncomfortable relationship with his misbehaving planet, his chaos planet, at the same time that Mars is going to be going back over like, what'd you do with money and this woman? And then in March, it goes over it again. So there will be some more to the story right after the inauguration. Perhaps a female judge will be involved. Perhaps not. Maybe it'll just be Stormy as the representing Venus, and then the legal system representing Saturn. And then in March, there will be ramifications. There are a number of other things happening. By that time, the wrecking ball will be on his... that important part of his chart for the final time. That's the point of collapse. As it just is collapse. And then you might say, well, okay, is J.D. Vance going to do any better? Well, I don't think so. I do not think so.
Okay, so you see Kamala being inaugurated.
Yes.
It's Inauguration Day. You see legal troubles continuing to intensify
Yes.
for Trump
Yes.
that extend into the spring,
Yes.
perhaps far longer than that. There's a lot of time between Election Day and Inauguration Day. So, have you looked at the Inauguration Day chart?
Yes.
Do you foresee this as a simple process or a really bumpy process? I didn't mean for it to be a trick
Answer
question.
that. Let's talk about what's going on now, because that's part of the atmosphere of why everyone's so uncertain. I will say, to cut to the chase, the inauguration chart looks like a very new way of being, and it has Tim Walz experiencing a very new relationship with the collective. So, and him being elevated. So that's another thing saying, okay, it looks really good for them. one more thing on that, and then I'll get to the weirdness. The other aspect of this is I've mentioned Mars being involved in this Aries full moon. Well, Mars is hitting walls as well, and through the end of October, it's just going to be pumping him more and more and more into coach in the third quarter mode. Like we're down, we're gonna win. Come on, folks. I mean, his what's the word we want for this? High energy.
He's
We can
channeling
do
Ted
this.
Lasso.
I don't think he has the sad streak that Ted Lasso has. But the believe, yeah, make it happen. But his leadership and pumping people up qualities are going to get even greater before the end of the month. So keep that in mind. Excuse me. So in the meantime, we've got this muck that we are in, a collaboration involving the three outermost planets, each of which is wrapping up a multi-year cycle, and they're in contact with each other. And one of them is about to move into a very, very different mode of expression that colors the inauguration. And it is wrapping up structural and institutional and foundational reworking, polite way of putting it, that's been going on since January of 2008. The next one has been, I call the cosmic fog machine, and it has its time in its home sign of Pisces since 2014, has amplified multiple narratives, what we call fake news, disinformation, misinformation campaigns from other countries, who knows. At any rate, the gaslighting and not knowing what you can believe and what you can't believe. And that's tying into Pluto's end times in Capricorn. And then the third one is the other cosmic change agent that tilts things and involves technology and sends lightning bolts in and just brings shocks and surprises. And it's finishing up its time in Taurus, where it has been since 2019. So we have these different finishing up. And the first one that's going to clear out is Pluto. The other two are going to take a while longer to get into a new way of being. So we have maximum collapse, maximum old guard hanging on for dear life. We have maximum corruption coming to the fore. I mean, the stories are just, okay, I expect more to come out about the Supreme Court before we get to the election. Like, what more? Okay, here we go. And it's just everything's at max. It's like in Spinal Tap, they finally got the monitor that'll go up to 11. Or maybe it goes up to 15. I don't know. So bottom line is things are in unprecedented territory for us, and know that disinformation is rampant more than possibly at any point in our lives. And fortunately, before we get into the election, it's going to be a Scorpio new moon, and so the sun and the moon and Mercury will be in Scorpio, and the new moon's going to be flowing easily with very stabilizing Saturn, all of which means trust the reaction of the water in your body, that your logical mind isn't going to answer things for you, but your instincts, your gut, your telepathy, your knowing will be accurate. And if you find yourself getting polluted by crazy town stuff going on in social media, well, you know the answer to that. That would be go away, get away from it. Now, it's likely that the days right before the election will bring something again unprecedented, but I really think that the whatever the weirdness is going to happen beforehand. If it's systems falling apart, if it's crazy people with guns showing up at polling stations, I don't know what it will be, but it abates as we get into election day. And also I just want to say at the outset, well, it's not the outset at this point. We've been going on for a while, but it used to be that I would pay a lot of attention to the chart when the first vote is cast on election day. But the election has already started, and appropriate for Neptune being at the end of Pisces, who knows when it started? People are already voting, so it's already going on. They're voting in all kinds of states. I am putting a lot less emphasis on the November chart, November 5th chart, than I have in previous years. So I mean, I know people who are, one astrologer that I respect enormously thinks something is going to go really sideways but I don't think it will. He also thinks Trump won't be on the ticket by election day, but I don't think that's going to happen either. Who knows? I mean, it's possible, but anyway. So just know that we're in a. So sorry. I bet this is some political party wanting me to give them money on a phone that I don't use. Okay, sorry. Uh, or anyway. So just know that people always say, okay, you talk about October, and then you talk about January, you talk about March. What about December? Well, there are two retrogrades in December. Who knows what we're gonna do? I don't know. I'll just warn everybody, as crazy and as hectic as the year has been, I suspect when December rolls around, you're just gonna sit on your couch under a blankie and have your favorite holiday treats. Mars, the planet of action. Mars, the planet of action, is going retrograde, and a Mars retrograde tend to go inward, especially when it's in the sign of the self, Leo, the kid. So I'm betting that people are going to not want to run around a whole lot, and they're going to want to do things from their childhood. This could be the year that we're all watching all the Rankin and Bass, Polar Express, you name it, whatever. We're all watching the old things. But I think there'll be a lot less activity out in the world, and maybe there's some
So
cleanup
you're
work.
banking on exhaustion from this whole process, and by
That's one way
December.
it could play out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think? Have you thought about the Mars retrograde?
I think I agree with you that I suspect that Kamala's going to win. I wonder, given what you already alluded to, all these major shifts that are happening in the first half of 2025, that that there is that Mars going backward, followed by a Venus retrograde, that there will probably be more than one day that she thinks, why did I want this job? Why how did I get here? And so, how do you see that part of the equation
Well,
unfolding?
a couple of things about her chart. The first is she is also a full moon baby. Well, maybe a few minutes shy of the full moon, but she's a Libra sun with an Aries moon. Aries moon is a fighter moon. Aries is a firefighter moon. Aries is, I'm going to kick your teeth in if you hurt that dog level moon. This is Wonder Woman stuff. So that's thing, and it fits really nicely with the US chart. And secondly, Saturn, which is how she embodies maturity and responsibility, is conjunct the US moon. She will be, people say, oh, she's going to be the law and order president. She might be, but there's a stabilizing and unifying force with her. And also with her signature for being a change agent, all in Virgo, she may privately wonder, uh-oh, why did I do this? But I don't
You'll
see
never
the
see it.
fighting. I don't see the fighting stopping. The fighting for, the working toward, the I'm going to make this better aspect of things. I think she will walk in with a checklist. Those of us who are old enough might remember that Clinton had, like, the first 100 days, he had something major he wanted to do every single day. I bet her first day, she's just, the to-do lists are going to be
She strikes me as a
formidable.
planner.
Oh, yeah.
She strikes me as someone who contemplates, comes up with a plan, works the plan, executes the plan, and
Yes.
right.
Yeah, and
So
she's
her,
got a running mate that absolutely fuels her. Fuels her. The way their charts interact, and if you watch them on stage, they're not together all that much anymore, but he's always pointing her out, he's pumping her up, he's standing to the side. He's not dimming her light, he's amping up the fire. So, another sideways long-winded way of saying, if anyone can navigate the huge collective shifts that we're going through, I think this is it. It's
okay.
almost like
Now you
central
mentioned,
casting center.
isn't that always the way it works? That there's like a cosmic central casting. Um, so you mentioned Tim Walsh's chart before, and that he's going to go undergo something that is, essentially paradigm shifting. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
It has to do with what's about to happen with Pluto. Pluto represents how we share and experience power. And every time Pluto changes signs, there is a big change in whatever has been the huge institution of power. If you go back through history, the church has had major changes in its structure and its reach, for one thing. Okay, so Pluto has been standing at the doorway of the sign of Aquarius, which is collective, moving from Capricorn, top heavy institutional power, to something that is more lateral. Groups of people together. You might remember Pluto was at the very beginning of Aquarius when and when Biden handed the nomination off to her, and immediately these unprecedented Zoom meetings getting interest in voters launched, and they launched by black women. So women set this in motion, and that's kind of the paradigm for what's going to be happening. So Walls has the moon. Well, it could be at the very end of Capricorn. I think it's at the very beginning of Aquarius because it changed signs on his day of birth. We don't have a birth time yet. No one's peeled that out of his office that I've heard of. The moon is your emotional driver. It's your relationship with women. Moon in Aquarius is everybody's buddy. Moon in Aquarius is the person who's on a first name basis with the dry cleaner. Doesn't that sound like him? I mean, who can go up to anybody and just chat and find a point of commonality. And Pluto will be at the top of on the inauguration chart. Pluto's going to be with the sun, so it's defining the next administration on his moon in the career house. So that's a very new, different, ushering in a different relationship to the collective, to collective power, to women. And he's a player in it.
That's astonishing.
I
All right,
I
so
love
we
astrology.
probably shouldn't leave out. It's just astonishing at how those cycles work out in astrological terms. It's like it makes you think there's a script or something.
Huh.
So we have left out J.D. Vance. He'd probably be very sad about that. But we should maybe talk about how his chart fits into all of this. If Trump is in jail and Walsh is dealing with paradigm shift, what is J.D. Vance going to be going through?
Addendum: Trump may not be in jail. But I will say
Okay.
Trump will not be walking freely around. That's kind of what March comes to. And it could be that he's under house arrest. It could be that he is not competent to stand trial. Anyone seen evidence of that lately? Maybe. But he will not be walking around freely. All right. His birthday chart for this year was all in institutions, and he hasn't been out in public much. So J.D. Vance has a chart that is in some ways very similar to Trump's. He presents similarly to Trump. He's Leo rising. He has Venus in Leo just behind his rising sign, and I found it hysterical. In fact, I put a little short up about this, that the miserable cat lady business started, and he's got this cat. Leo rules cats, but it's also in a tight, uncomfortable relationship with Mars in his chart. So he has an inherent discomfort with women, with, oh, guess what? Sexuality. Does this seen anyone else wearing guy liner? I mean, I don't know what's up with him. But that chart on August 19th also made things, yes, in a way he was propelled more into the public eye, but where Uranus, agent of radical change, is floating around now, it's in a very, very uncomfortable situation with his chart, and it's also in wrecking ball mode in his career house, and women could be part of the downfall for him. And on Inauguration Day, since he and Trump, if you put their charts together, like where the lines are right next to each other, really, really close. On Inauguration Day, there's a female executive, there's a female influence in the House of Allies and Open Enemies. I don't see good stuff coming. I just see uncomfortable stuff coming for him. Very uncomfortable.
All right, so that's the two storylines I'm assuming that you were talking
Yeah,
about.
those are the two
The
storylines.
two through lines. But all of this happens in context of a larger world. I mean, none of this would be happening if there weren't millions of people, voting for one side or the other. So, do you have any ideas about the social landscape of what would you foresee if these things all come to pass? Does everybody just go home and play nice because they're tired, or
Nope.
do they start the business in a different way?
A couple of things. It's one reason why a number of issues have come to a head now that we have been percolating below the surface since the 60s, since the civil rights legislation, since the time when Kamala and Walls were born. We have something going on that's a recurrence of what happened during Reconstruction. So in the days after the Civil War, and at that time, the slaves had been freed, and the moneyed, powered interests whipped up fear in the poorer white population to create division between them and the freed slaves, and set some animosity in motion that led to really horrific things. And we've got a recurrence of the influence that was at work then now. So racism isn't going away. The challenge to the notion of separation in church and state isn't going away. It'll be different next year, okay? By next summer, we're going to start to see that we're going to burn out of some of this stuff finally. But we're in the last gasp of the playing out of some issues in a way that we didn't deal with all that well in the 1800s. And oh, looky, they still exist.
Now, I know astrologers have been talking about that all of this is part of a moment in time where the United States is reckoning with its own shadow stuff. They associate it with the 200 and almost 50-year cycle of Pluto coming back to the place where it was when the United States was born on July 4th. Other astrologers are arguing that nations have more than one birth chart. They have an intentional founding, they have a constitutional founding. You could put in a bunch of charts. And so it's really a range of time. And so by that perspective, the United States is still in this cleaning up of its shadow bits. Do you see that continuing to play out in these stories?
Yes. Because the Constitution is going to have its Pluto return. Was that 1789? A lot of things happened when Pluto was where it was during that year. That was the year of, you can say that democracy, the concept of democracy was born in France at that time, and then we had our Constitution. So all these things are going to come around again for, okay, what are the ground rules? What are we agreeing on? Although it's a different quality than the Pluto in Capricorn resources based fighting, because Pluto is in the house of money and resources in the 1776 chart that most people use. We could get into a huge argument over which chart. But at any rate, just know it was in Capricorn. It was at 27 degrees Capricorn, no matter what time of day you're dealing with, on July 4th, 1776. So we've been revisiting what the ground rules are, and we're seeing that there are some people who don't even want to agree to the ground rules anymore. Oh, okay. Now we're going to revisit, like, what do we want the Constitution to be? And there will be issues that continue to come up with that. But I'm a fundamentally optimistic person. I mean, I think we'll be okay. I think, especially if there are more and more women steering the ship. That's a very sexist thing to say, but the female politicians of the younger generation have a very different approach to things than the Pluto and Capricorn type entrenched guard. The boomers, I'm sorry, my group, out, go. We need Gen X and younger, because they have a completely different way of dealing with things. And I think that means that it's going to be, especially once we move into the big shift of all these outer planets that we're saying are finishing up their cycles, they're all going to move into a continuing conversation with each other in clothing that we have not seen, in energies that we have not experienced in that combination. I don't see women going back. I don't see them going back.
Yeah, well, it's amazing how campaign slogans that tend to win tap into some particular zeitgeist of the moment. And as soon as I heard the chant, "We're not going back," I was like, well, they're at least catching what the planets are doing right now. I mean, they never go backwards, but it's really, I mean, I think it's, I tell my students at Magic School that this shift is unprecedented.
Yep.
In our lifetimes. We haven't seen something like the 4 slowest moving planets that astrologers tend to use in their forecasting, all shifting from earth and water, the mud, to fire and air that feed on one another within 6 months of each other, more or less. And that's like the underlying assumptions of what's possible change. And I don't even know how to quantify that for my own life, let alone what that's going to mean for a collective. I think the conversation's just starting. But have you given that any thoughts about where we might end up?
We've been getting some prep work for that. The eclipses that we have been in since March of 2023 have involved one of the signs that will be part of this new expression of energy. And those eclipses have been pushing us to rewrite how we deal with each other, to write new relationship ground rules for each other, and to be much more focused on self and less worried about the other. So we've all been pushed. I keep describing it as booster rockets going off. We're by ourselves in our little, our little spaceship, and the rockets just keep shooting us further and further and further. So we've been trained in that energy as a way of looking at it, I guess. And so when it hits, there'll be a sense of, well, why not? I mean, I think we will all be more daring because there's kind of a part of it will be a sense of relief, I think. Part of it will be some portion of the population being really angry. I think that's probable. And just willing to, a sense of why not? Like, what have we been through? What have we been through these last number of years? There's a freedom of movement. Let's go for it. I'm thinking of, I think within a week, very, very soon after Harris's campaign started, all this social media nonsense about J.D. Vance started coming out, accusing him of things that apparently he did not do, but they were believable. And I was going to, it was at the end of June, so it was a week after she was suddenly the candidate, and I was waiting for someone in my car and scrolling through and seeing all these ridiculous, stupid jokes about Vance that are far more infantile than anything I usually pay attention to. And I was laughing to the point of tears. And my friend walked up with the card, saw me, and said, "Oh, Kathy's looking at couch memes." And in fact, I was. And we talked about it and said it was the sense of relief and being able to laugh again. And I see that as part of what a large number of us will be experiencing by the middle of 2025. Like, woohoo, we can do this, and we can do this, and we can do this. Have you noticed, as part of this, have you noticed a lot of people lightening their load now, getting rid of projects, cutting out obligations? I'm seeing this happening with a lot of astrologers, actually, and like physical objects just getting, it's like there's a push to, you're about to get on the plane, you can only take this with you, get rid of, what's most important, clean it up. I think we'll be moving a
Hey,
lot
that's
more.
my life right now.
Yes.
Well, I had to like downsize significantly to get all of my furniture and stuff in a pod, and everything else is gone. So it's like starting over again. Like my pod is my seed, and
Yes.
it's gonna
Pod is
have to be
appropriate.
replanted and build something new. So I totally get that. Um, so we've been talking about the United States, and the stars are global.
Yes.
We are certainly in complex territory. I saw an article in the Washington Post where one of the commentators were arguing that we're already in the midst of the Third World War. It's just simmering in the background. Do you see this shift in energy having impacts outside of the United States, whether it be, the conflicts that are simmering in different parts of the globe, whether it be in our ability to cooperate over bigger things, bigger than war, but like, climate change or something like that? What do you think the impact will be on that?
Well, two things. First off, I think we've been at war. I think we've been at war for years, and Neptune in Pisces has been part of it. I think we have been in the middle of an information war, and that's been going on all over the planet. All right, it's big in the U.S., but there are other countries that have really, really had ramifications for that. Secondly, once Pluto moves into Aquarius, that really fosters much more of a communal experience of things. I would imagine that NATO will admit even more countries at that point. I think there'll be a much more of a collective, we are in this together. What can we do to fix what can we do to fix things? And I think electronics are going to have a lot to do with that. Technology will have a lot to do with that. It is possible that more of a global currency comes in. And who knows? It didn't happen the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, but don't scream, people. Borders coming down, not out of the question. New ways of countries interacting with each other, new ways of delineating who's what tribe kind of thing.
Well, I mean, in the context of history, borders are always coming down. We just keep making them bigger. And eventually we run out of biggerness unless, we join the United Federation of Planets or something. And
Maybe that
I think that's just the natural evolution of societies, even though if people don't like to think about it in the short term, but in the long term, that's what we've been going for, thousands of years. So I don't think anybody who thinks about those kinds of things is going to be stunned, even if the short term it might seem like, I don't want to do that. But, okay, so it's going to affect the globe. We are kind of in an information war now, but the shift brings in a whole different set of tools that are possible that we may not even know about right now.
the internet, for example, could end up being wildly different than it currently is. I'll just put
How
that
could
out
it be
there.
wildly different? Help us visualize.
Hell if I know. I'm just telling you. that, at the beginning of the 90s, could you see the internet? I didn't. I know it was being, it was in the works, or existed in government. But with Uranus moving into Gemini, we could have a very, very different experience of technology. And I don't know what the next phase of the internet would look like. I have no idea.
Oh,
But
I can make a guess right now. All
please.
those sci-fi shows that we've had where the Oasis in Ready Player One terms, or the virtual place you all go because you have goggles to walk around in. There's something about the bilateral goggle thing that fits very well with Gemini, and I think
Doesn't
someone will
it?
make between AI increasing and the possibility of creating virtual worlds. I would not be surprised if we end up there.
So we're on international holodecks,
Yeah.
basically beaming in and chatting with our
By the
friends
time,
from all
like
over.
7 years from the movement, I mean, we talked about. I remember talking to you when Uranus was moving into Taurus, so that long ago, that Taurus is an Earth thing. That things were going to shift to force us to radically shift how we create batteries, why we need them, and electric cars came around, and new ways to design batteries have come around, and that's been the process of Uranus moving through Taurus. And I'm fairly confident Gemini's got a dual nature. It's virtual reality that I think will come into play in this mix in a way that we can't even conceive about yet. I think the hologram will come into play because that's another dual natured thing. And we will see holograms much more prevalent. I mean, things are already there, so I can make these predictions. Like, people are already investing in their visors, and people are already having tables that can show holographic interfaces. But I always remember that opening scene to Minority Report,
Oh my
where they got
God,
those
yes.
heads-up displays and they're moving things around. We are going in that direction, and they always say it's far in the future, but I think some of these things may be not as far as we might think. I won't predict flying cars yet, but because I keep hoping that people aren't allowed to have flying cars. But beyond
I'm
that,
with you on
I
that.
think it's going
I
to
will
be,
say Philip K. Dick called a lot of stuff.
yeah.
So whenever he opened his door and there was that weird pink triangle that beamed stuff into him, who knows what what he was made privy to, but a lot of stuff he's written about has turned into being.
Okay. Um, I didn't want to go away without talking a little bit about the Supreme Court. You mentioned it at the very beginning, that you've been looking into the charts of some of the people involved with that. I assume things have the possibility of shifting if Kamala gets into office.
Oh,
How do you
regardless.
see? Okay, what does that mean?
I don't understand how Clarence Thomas is still on the bench with what Pluto has been doing to him. But once Pluto moves well and good into Aquarius, it is it's going to affect his health, his heart, his marriage, and his identity. So even if Kamala is not the president, Thomas has a trajectory of something causing him to leave the court. And it may be many somethings. So he's number one on my list
Do you
for
have a timeline for that?
departure. I don't understand why it hasn't happened yet. Um, January, February, March, it's soon. It is soon. I also, yeah,
I'm
yes.
assuming that Supreme Court justices often play the game of I'm going to hold on and maybe I can get someone in my seat that I approve of.
Right. I also have, can't remember the specifics. I know that Alito has some really, really difficult aspects, but I don't see him letting go. I see him digging in and continuing to cite witch hunters from the 1700s and his opinions in the 21st century. Um, Initially, my second candidate was Kavanaugh, and I will mention that suddenly a lot of stuff has come back around involving him as these three outer planets are doing their dance. So there are some things happening with him that are pretty inescapable, and then stuff is very uncomfortable for John Roberts as well. Those so Clarence Thomas has the moon in Aquarius, very early degrees. Pluto's going to be going over it. And Kavanaugh and Roberts are both Aquarian suns. Robert shares my birthday, but not the same year, so it's still like, oh no. And there are other things that are just going to be increasingly difficult for him. So those are my three candidates for departing within the next year. Whether it's because the IRS investigates them, which is going to happen with Thomas, if there's nothing else. And who knows? Maybe there's also, well, anyway, there are other things. There are other issues with Thomas and Kavanaugh. The whole issue with the FBI being told to sit on 4,500 tips and his confirmation not going through, and then doing something in a ruling that he said he would not do. So I think he's got something, and his might be more of a backroom. Here, buddy, we'll go easy on you if you just go away. Here's beer. Want some beer? Go have some beer. And and Roberts could just say, I'm sick of dealing with this and claim health, but it really won't be.
So, what you're suggesting is that when, John Oliver offered up a luxury bus to Thomas to retire in luxury, he perhaps should have made the offer to several of the other justices because one or more of them may have taken him up on the offer.
Yeah. Easy out.
Okay. All right. We have been talking for a while. This conversation is absolutely fascinating to me. What last words would you leave all of our listeners on what they can do personally in their own lives to navigate these next couple months? I know a lot of people are, as they watch the news from both political sides of the equation.
Right.
So how would you give astrological counsel to people?
Ignore the cosmic fog machine. Know that it's in overdrive. So don't listen to polls. Don't watch polls. Be really mindful about what your media diet is, and maybe go on a media diet. Like, just put stuff. Tasha Silver has this great idea of a God box. All right. So when you find your mind going into overdrive, write something down, stick it in a box, put a lid on it, leave it there. That could be actually really, really helpful. So know that there's a lot of fear. Fear is running rampant. It's a virus. Don't infect yourself with it. Do things for yourself and trust your own instincts. All right. We have a lot that will be resonating within our bodies, and you're going to know. And if you hear someone saying something different than what every cell in your body is telling you, do you want to go nuts, or do you want to get away from the contrary? I say, listen to your body. Also, do whatever tiny things you can, especially once Pluto moves into Aquarius. Individual action is increasingly important, and it doesn't matter if it looks like a stupid little thing to you. It may end up helping a lot of other people. So, and pick your battles and drop. There's a lot of baggage to drop, and if it's time for you to part ways with someone or a group of people, do not go running after them. Bless them and mind your own business. Mind your damn business. There's a campaign slogan.
Do you see this shift that we're just beginning likely to increase social engagement, community engagement?
Yes.
I mean, I feel like we've been in like introvert nirvana for the last few years. We had a pandemic, everybody got locked in their little boxes, and it's almost like the opposite is going to happen. We're going to enter like extrovert nirvana. So how do you think that's going to affect our social landscape?
Well, I think people are going to be much more self-starting, and probably will have different social groups and maybe different activities. Next year especially is going to be a time to do the stuff you haven't done, what you haven't had the nerve to do before, and to go out, get out of your house, go do things, go be daring, take chances. And yeah, I think that we'll be much more communicative and self-starting, actually, and not just sitting around like, oh, nobody ever calls me. No one ever sends me texts. Like, no, I'm just going to make my life happen. That's what I think.
All right.
And we're Eeyores. All you Eeyores out there, go be nice. Be nice to yourself.
Go out and be with like humans. Humans and other creatures.
Yeah, and
well,
I mean, with Pluto in Aquarius, the collective system is going to be really important. Like who you get along with and who your neighbors are. And maybe it's that you have a gang of 5 when previously it was like a dozen. So what? The people will be much more aligned with who you have decided that you're going to be, which is you, by the way, and not who you were brought up to be. So how's that?
There's a good hint. You do you. All right. I am so grateful that you've taken out the time to give us a deep dive download into the landscape that's ahead, what's possible, where we all might be headed collectively. Did I miss anything that you are dying to talk about?
No, we'll just leave it. I mean, that could get really, really technical. There will be bumps, there'll be weird things, but just know that there's a lot of smoke and puffery. And if you just keep the scene where Toto pulls the curtain back in Wizard of Oz, keep that in mind. Like, you're going to see that there's something pulling the machinery, and a lot of it was smoke and mirrors and not real. So go do real things.
Did you mean to do that when Wicked's coming out in like a couple weeks?
I might have just tapped into that. I have my opinions about that musical, but anyway.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I'm so glad that you're here. I know people will get a lot out of, your wisdom if people want to follow up with you personally, how do they get in touch with you? How do they follow you? Tell us where you can be found.
I have the South Node in Gemini, so I have many places in the information world. My website is empowermentunlimited.net. I have weekly podcasts. I have forecasts for every new and full moon. I have forecasts for every month. I have a Patreon where there's like special information and a lot of dad jokes lately. And that's patreon.com/Kathy Biehl. My YouTube channel is Professional Aquarian. And all of my forecasts are there. My radio TV show is there. I'm a host on Om Times Media twice a month. So my interviews with other astrologers, with people who make really cool tarot decks, and just whoever amuses me ends up there. Donna has been a guest multiple times. And on Facebook, I have the page Empowerment Unlimited and also a group called the Astro Insight Lounge that tends to focus on examples of astrology in the news. Like, here's stuff that's happening in the news that's living out the symbolism and energy of, and it's not all politics. Some of it is, a lot of it is, okay. But it's also international because I've got people in other countries. So we learn a lot about the problems that Australia is having with its constitutional shortfalls and stuff. So
Okay.
that's pretty much it.
I highly recommend to all of you to follow up with Kathy. As I said, she is one of my favorite astrologers on this planet, and that's a lot coming from me since I know so very many of them.
Are they all as smart ass? No, probably not.
So I'm glad you came on my reopening my podcast inaugural season again. And I just want to promise all of you that Kathy will be back. You will see her again because she's one of my favorite humans. And come the beginning of the year, Kathy and I will be doing our annual storytelling for the whole new year that people can sign up for and come and make all of this stuff relevant to your own personal chart. So again, thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Woohoo! So glad we did this. And now don't forget, before you leave, check out the show notes at www.magicandmastery.com/podcast. I've included the timestamps and the links to all kinds of things talked about in the episode, just to make it easy to refer back to the sections that you're most interested in. And so thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Magic and Mastery podcast. Of course, I love getting your feedback because it helps me to figure out what makes you jazzed so I can provide more of the good stuff. So it would mean so much to me if you just take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. And if you like it, why don't you share it with a friend?